What is a nation, and how does it come to be? A society arises from the interactions between individuals of a population. They agree to the terms of interactions between each other, outlining acceptable and unacceptable behavior. As society further develops, the exchange of ideas occur, which in turn leads to the creation of cultures, with families passing down certain ideas over generations, creating traditions. These traditions themselves may then be adopted by individuals outside the family, but still in the community. This instantiates the culture of a people. This culture plays a role in the development of families and individuals, favoring those characteristics deemed to be of a superior nature to others. This is how the different peoples of the world shape themselves in accordance to the values of their society, and explains the differences between cultures and people across the world. What this all means is something I will hopefully cover further down the line. But for now, let's talk about how society began. Society began with the concept of the self, or who you are. Who you are can be defined as the entity which occupies the physical body you possess, with your inner world being determined and shaped by your own thoughts and feelings. This internal world is entirely in your control and cannot be compelled by anyone to affect it in any way you do not desire. This means that you possess total authority over this space from your core to your body. The most extreme border of the self is your physical body, which represents the delimitation of your authority coming from your internal world and the authority of the material world, where we are subjected to various forces as well as interactions with other sentient entities, where we lack total authority. Whilst we recognize the body as a tangible border between the internal world and the material world, we must recognize that there is also an ethereal border that covers the body as well as everything that the self owns as property. How do we establish property? Well, simply put, if I own a banana and I'm an entity that requires food to survive, and I assert my ownership of a banana by picking it for my consumption, to remove the banana from my possession, thus denying me sustenance, would cause me to weaken or die from malnutrition, which is tantamount to assault by proxy. Likewise with removing the tools or other means to acquire sustenance. As a result of this logic, we can argue that self-defense of one's body and one's property is of equal value in that if one's body is assaulted, they suffer an immediate detriment, whereas a theft or vandalism of one's property is a delayed detriment that may result in future consequences, potentially for other parties, apart from the immediate victim. So now that we have established the idea of the body for an individual as well as its positions, what happens when two sentient entities come into contact? When two bodies come into contact, it is natural to establish a relationship or understanding between each other, by which we either associate or disassociate. If two entities agree to interact on the grounds of an understanding, we have the beginnings of a culture. A culture is established when two entities have an understanding of behaviors by which they interact with each other. Expanding upon the interactions of the two entities, we can discuss the family as a body, because whilst the individual is a body unto itself, the individual is an emanation from the union of two other individuals, the behaviors of which constitute the information by which the individual is raised to full maturity whilst within the body of the family. Thus we establish the concepts of the line of succession and tradition. Understanding that an individual arises from a family, we must establish the rights of an individual relative to a family. If a family produces a child, is it not entitled to raise it as it sees fit, with regards to what the parents determine as right? Furthermore, if the child, who is likely to aid in the activities of the household or provide care to his parent in old age, were to become the subject of violence, is the individual who begot the child not entitled to defend the child from hostile entities? The child is the derivative of one's own body and therefore entitled to the same protections not only afforded it in the individual sense, but also the familial sense. Now we move from one family to the community. Because family members can't produce children with each other, members of families must seek out individuals outside of the family body to produce offspring. This basic necessity, coupled with the potential to trade with non-family members, drives individuals in the family to interact with those outside the family. As people are social creatures, we must assume that families have the inherent desire to stick together, as well as associate with other families of similar views. To this end, we establish the community by which non-blood related individuals, or at least distantly related individuals, interact with each other on the premise of acceptable behaviors not violating the established beliefs and behaviors of other families. We engage in the exchange of services and knowledge and create relationships between individuals and groups as a function of communities. Now we establish the relationship of the individual to its community. As a member of a community, an individual has certain obligations to be accepted in that community, namely not to violate any cultural taboos or laws in order to participate in that community. In return, the individual enjoys a larger form of protection from the community, not only in the physical sense, but as well as the sense of a way of life. Expanding yet further, we encounter the nation as a body. A nation is established when many communities come together under one ruling structure. There are many kinds of ruling structures, but their intention is the same, which is the delineating of the boundary of lands in possession by a people of a certain culture to prevent peoples of a different culture trying to exert their authority onto unwilling communities or individuals. To this end, a nation is founded on the principle of preserving the values and culture of a people against entities that lie outside of the borders of the lands in possession of the people of that nation. Now we justify the concept of borders. We have before established the many bodies that build and represent a nation or society. Knowing this, we gain an appreciation of the distances between different entities, these distances being determined by culture. If we wish to differentiate different nations or peoples, we merely have to see how much influence or distance there is relative to other bodies. Do people prefer a national body that can directly interfere with personal matters? Does the community possess the desire to control the actions of others loosely or tersely? But the reality remains the same, that borders are indispensable to understanding what is right or wrong. When an individual ends and the community begins, and what actions are permissible and which are taboo. We must also recognize these borders as sacrosanct, because to infringe upon them is to break the ancient premise that to infringe on another body directly or indirectly is unacceptable, that the individuals that form the families that form the communities that form the nation are entitled to live as they have freely elected to do so, without the interference of outside bodies or foreign bodies. To this end, we introduce protections, be it in the form of services like police or soldiers, or the laws that they are supposed to enforce. The borders help us understand our relationship to each other, and how we should conduct ourselves towards each other, as well as outlining which issues fall into which body, and to then understand our relationships as individuals and as communities, to how those issues affect and influence the bodies that are found within the nation. How we determine where these issues fall is through the forum, where all bodies are able to express their position. The courts are where these decisions are ratified by qualified individuals as to the necessity of implementation, as well as the validity of the grounds on which action is taken so as not to compromise the current accepted state of society. All this goes on to establish the demarcations between the different societal bodies and help create the philosophical and social framework of our nations and societies. In summary, we see how societies grow from individuals to families, and how these families go on to form communities, and then how these communities form nations. All the while, the values and traditions of families go on to influence the culture of society. We also establish the importance of boundaries and how they protect us and our way of life. Questions that arise from the organic creation of nations is how do these societies compare to the nations and societies of today? These are the values and logic of our ancestors, and why have we departed from them? And is there any justification for such a departure? All of these questions are important and will be expanded upon in the future. Until then,